The airport lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a pale sheen over the gleaming floors of Gate 12. Outside, the sky was still dark, the world caught in that strange in-between hour where the night hasn't ended, but the day hasn't yet begun. Most passengers moved like ghosts, scrolling through their phones, rubbing sleep from their eyes, clutching coffee cups with half-hearted urgency. It was a quiet, almost weightless hour. A baby's cry echoed from somewhere near baggage check. An overhead announcement reminded passengers of a delayed flight to Munich. No one seemed to listen, and among all this quiet routine, a man sat completely still. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't listening to music. He wasn't fidgeting or adjusting his seat. He simply sat, hood pulled gently over his brow, a worn black backpack resting between his feet, head lowered, gaze soft and fixed on the floor in front of him. No briefcase, no watch, no visible sign of status, just presence, invisible to most. And maybe that was exactly how he wanted it. His name was Elijah Combe. Not that anyone here knew or cared. To the outside world, Elijah had advised heads of state, delivered strategies for peace negotiations, and served as Ghana's top national advisor. But none of that mattered here. At this moment, in this airport, he wasn't a diplomat or a scholar. He was just a quiet black man in a hoodie, waiting to board. When business class was called, Elijah rose from his seat slowly. No rush, no effort to cut ahead. He waited as an older woman with a cane stepped forward first. Then he moved forward with a small, patient nod. "Bonjour," he offered gently to the gate agent. She didn't look up, just scanned his boarding pass and motioned him through with the kind of practiced indifference that airports breed. He nodded again, this time more to himself, and moved onto the jet bridge without a word. Behind him, the sound of heavy footsteps and louder voices stirred. A French businessman barked into his Bluetooth headset, waving his gold-trimmed boarding pass like it was a royal invitation. Elijah didn't look back. He didn't need to. He'd heard that voice 1,000 times in different forms, in different rooms. It always sounded the same. Inside the aircraft, the lights were warmer, softer. The scent of citrus cleaning spray still hung in the air, and a flight attendant adjusted the headrest of seat 1A with practiced precision. Her name tag read Claire Moreau. Her uniform was crisp, hair pulled tight into a bun, posture straight, eyes sharp. She moved with quiet confidence, scanning the cabin like a director before opening night. She smiled at the man in seat 1A, a European diplomat traveling to West Africa on official business, and handed him a glass of champagne with genuine ease. Then her gaze slid down the aisle and stopped. Seat 2B. She didn't blink at first, but something in her demeanor shifted. The man in the hoodie. He was already seated, already buckled in. He wasn't typing, wasn't sleeping, wasn't doing anything. Just sitting, calm and still, his backpack tucked beneath the seat, hands resting on his thighs. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. He could feel her gaze. Claire's smile faltered, almost imperceptibly. No tailored suit, no designer carry-on, no expensive shoes or assistant waiting nearby, just a hoodie and quiet confidence. But to Claire, something about it didn't add up. Something didn't sit right. She glanced at her tablet, then at the man, then back again. She leaned slightly toward her colleague and murmured without making eye contact. Did someone upgrade at the last minute? The junior attendant shook her head. Claire didn't speak again. Her eyes narrowed. Her fingers tightened around her clipboard. Something about this didn't feel right. Something about him. Not what he did. Not what he said, just the way he sat. The way he blended in too well. She didn't know his name, didn't know his background, But she had already made one decision. He didn't belong. Claire moved with precision, her clipboard hugged tight to her chest as she made her way down the aisle. The smile she wore wasn't warm. It was trained, practiced. The kind of smile that says, "I'm in charge," without saying anything at all. She stopped beside seat 2B and turned slightly to face the man in the hoodie. He hadn't moved since he boarded. He sat with the same quiet stillness, eyes steady, back straight. Claire cleared her throat gently, tilting her head just enough to make it seem polite. "Good evening, sir. May I see your boarding pass?" Her voice was even, but her eyes had already decided something was off. Elijah Combe didn't hesitate. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie, pulled out the folded slip and handed it to her with a single nod. She took it, glanced once, then again. Her brows lowered just slightly. Business class. Row 2B. It was correct, completely valid. But the silence between them had shifted. She handed it back without a word, then forced a smile that barely touched her eyes. "Sir," she said smoothly, "I'm afraid we'll need this seat for a high-priority passenger. Would you mind relocating to economy?" She said it like it was routine, like it was a favor, like it wasn't a decision she had already made the moment she saw his hoodie. Elijah's reply was calm, nearly weightless. "I paid for this seat. I'll remain here. No anger, no attitude, just clarity." Claire's lips parted slightly, then pressed together again. The smile didn't hold. "We'll compensate you," she added quickly, as if money would clean the discomfort. But Elijah didn't respond. He simply returned to the position he was in, calm, unmoved. That silence made something burn beneath Claire's uniform. A few rows behind them, a young assistant leaned forward and whispered something into the ear of a suited man tapping at a tablet. Claire glanced over, then back at her clipboard. The European official hadn't arrived yet. His seat still showed unassigned. A diplomat from the EU, running late as always. But Claire had already made up her mind. She turned slightly toward her junior crew member, her voice low but deliberate. "Let's find someone. Flexible," she said, not naming anyone, but not needing to. Minutes passed, and suddenly the cabin activity shifted. Quiet glances, brief taps on the shoulders of passengers seated in business class. But not all passengers, only the black men. Row by row, subtly, almost politely, crew members began reviewing tickets again, offering vague explanations about seat balance, about priority reassignments, about changes in configuration. A Ghanaian businessman in 3A was approached next. Then a Nigerian engineer in 4C. Their faces registered confusion, then resignation. Most complied without protest, but the discomfort was growing. It lingered in the air like static. No white passengers were asked. Not a single one. The plane hadn't moved an inch, but something already felt wrong. A heaviness settled into the walls of the cabin, a silence that wasn't peaceful anymore. Elijah remained in his seat, still silent, still watching, not as a man under pressure, but as a man measuring the pressure rising around him. Claire didn't look back at him. Not yet. But her plan was already in motion, and the flight hadn't even left the ground. Claire returned to row 2 like a wave coming back to shore, not angry, not hurried, but colder than before. Her steps were more exact now, her smile gone. She stood just off Elijah's shoulder and spoke with a tone sharpened to cut through resistance. "Sir, I need your cooperation," she said. Quiet enough to sound professional, but firm enough to feel like a threat. Elijah didn't turn to face her fully. He just looked ahead, then replied, measured and clear. "Then apply your policy equally." There was no defiance in his voice, only truth. the kind that sits heavy in the air because it's harder to argue with than anger. Claire didn't respond. She blinked once, almost as if trying to push that line out of her mind. Then she turned without a word and walked down the aisle again. But this time, she didn't pretend to look at the seat chart. She walked with intent. Her eyes landed on a Nigerian man in his 40s. Black suit, silver-framed glasses, laptop open on the tray. Claire stopped beside him, leaned slightly, and murmured something about operational adjustments. The man looked up, startled, then confused. He asked if there was a problem. She said no, but the tone said yes. 3 minutes later, she was at row 4. This time, it was a Ghanaian father traveling with his young son. The boy was wearing tiny headphones, kicking his feet under the seat. The father was halfway through reading a printed itinerary. Claire leaned in and asked the man to follow her for a quick reassignment. "Why?" he asked. "Just a seat adjustment due to weight distribution," she answered smoothly. The man frowned. "Is the flight unbalanced?" Claire smiled, thin, distant. "No, not exactly. It's just a precaution." The pattern was no longer subtle. 2 black men in business class, both approached within minutes. No white passengers had been asked. Not the American tech executive with his noise-canceling headphones. Not the European couple flipping through a travel guide. Not even the chatty Frenchman across from Elijah, who had just ordered a second glass of champagne before takeoff. None of them were touched. None of them were spoken to. Passengers were noticing now. Not everyone, but enough. A woman in the aisle seat leaned toward her husband. "Why are they only asking the black passengers?" she whispered. Her husband shook his head slowly, but said nothing. Silence became the safest option in an uncomfortable space, and still, Elijah sat, watching, not resisting, not intervening, just watching. The pages in his notebook remained blank. His fingers interlocked lightly in his lap. His eyes traced every movement. Claire's fake smiles, the hesitant footsteps of the displaced, the confusion on their faces as they were asked to give up something they had paid for. It wasn't rage in his expression. It wasn't sadness either. It was calculation. He thought of something a mentor once told him. Bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it just smiles, then moves you out of the way. Claire had never raised her voice, never said a word out of place, but her choices spoke volumes. The way she walked, the direction of her attention, the specific rows she skipped without looking. Bias, Elijah thought, has a tone, and this one was cold. Claire had just begun to turn back toward row 2 for the 3rd time, her heels clicking with a growing edge of frustration, when a quiet shift broke the rhythm of the cabin. The cockpit door opened. It wasn't loud, but the click was sharp enough to draw attention. From behind it stepped the captain, tall, composed, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a crisp uniform that still carried the weight of military discipline. His eyes moved quickly, scanning the cabin for a moment, and then they stopped. His gaze locked onto Elijah Combe. The captain froze, not in panic, but in recognition. His posture shifted, almost subconsciously. The man who had just moments ago been managing crew assignments and runways now stood straighter, as if instinct had taken over. He didn't nod. He didn't wave. He stepped forward, not casually, not like greeting a VIP in first class, but with formality, precision, purpose, the kind of walk that silences a room before the destination is reached. The soft murmur of the cabin faded. Utensils paused. Pages stopped turning. Even the low hum of overhead conversation seemed to dim. The captain reached row 2. He didn't glance at Claire, didn't acknowledge the other passengers. He stopped directly in front of Elijah's seat. Then, in full view of every person in business class, he raised his right hand to his forehead. A formal military salute. It held for a moment, solid, intentional, and full of weight. Then came the words, spoken not for Elijah, but for everyone else in the cabin. "Sir, I wasn't informed you were on board. Welcome." Gasps weren't loud, but they were immediate. Claire's expression dropped so fast it felt audible. Her eyes darted between Elijah and the captain, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The diplomat in 1A leaned forward, clearly startled, his glass of champagne frozen mid-air. A woman near the aisle whispered, "Did he say, sir?" But no one replied. The captain turned to face the crew. His voice was calm, but louder now, authoritative without needing to push. "This is Dr. Elijah Combe," he said clearly, "Chief Delegate to the African Union and a national strategist. He's to be treated with the utmost respect." He didn't look at Claire when he said it. He didn't have to. Claire blinked, her face flushing pale beneath her perfectly applied makeup. She stammered, her voice suddenly small, brittle. I didn't know." Elijah looked up at her then, for the first time in full. His expression hadn't changed. Still calm, still quiet, still unreadable. But his eyes held something that didn't require volume to speak. "You didn't need to," he said, each word measured like it had waited its turn. "You just needed to treat me like a person." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, every person within earshot knew exactly what had just happened. Respect hadn't walked in with a suit. It had been sitting quietly in a hoodie the whole time. The captain nodded once more and returned to the cockpit without another word. Claire remained still. She didn't know whether to apologize or disappear. Around her, the silence of the cabin had shifted again. But this time, it wasn't tension. It was reckoning. The passengers who had watched Elijah in silence now watched Claire. Their expressions said more than words could have. The imbalance had been corrected, but not with force, not with outrage, with truth, and one salute. The silence didn't fade. It settled deeper. Not awkward, not accidental, just dense, like the air had grown heavier with realization. The captain's salute still lingered in the minds of everyone in business class, replaying in stunned silence. Claire remained still at the galley divider, her clipboard forgotten, her expression hollow. She wasn't looking at Elijah anymore. She couldn't. Her poise had cracked, and what stood in its place was something she didn't yet know how to carry: consequence. Then came the purser, older, unhurried, with eyes that had seen decades of flights and perhaps too many moments like this. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She leaned in and whispered to Claire, low and brief. The message was clear. Claire's lips barely parted, but no words came. A second later, she handed over her tablet and stepped away. No outburst, no attempt to save face. Her walk down the aisle was slow, stripped of command, the kind of exit that draws no attention, yet somehow says everything. She didn't return. The diplomat in 1A shifted uncomfortably. His polished composure had dulled. He looked ahead blankly, then down at his untouched glass. The champagne fizz had gone flat, just like the illusion he carried on board. A brief glance at Elijah confirmed what the diplomat couldn't admit. He had misread the entire room. He looked away again, fixing his cuffs. There was no fixing the silence. Further back, the Ghanaian father leaned toward his son and whispered something quiet. The boy peeked at Elijah and gave a tiny smile. His father didn't smile back. He simply nodded once, a gesture of quiet affirmation. The Nigerian engineer reopened his laptop, placed it deliberately on the tray, and resumed typing with a calm, focused rhythm. It wasn't just work. It was reclamation. No words, No outrage, no cameras lifted. But something had realigned in the cabin, not in the furniture, in the people. Elijah hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. He didn't need to. His presence alone had become gravity, still, unshaken, undeniable. He reached into his backpack, retrieved a small black notebook, and opened it. No fanfare, no page flipping, just pen to paper, line by line. He wrote with the same calm he carried when he boarded. He wrote not to record the humiliation, but to witness the silence that followed. His fingers moved slowly. His face remained composed. There was no triumph there, no gloating, just clarity. Back in the aisle, the junior attendants moved carefully. Their steps were quieter now. Their eyes no longer scanned rows. They avoided them. The service resumed on paper, but something in the rhythm had shifted. No one asked for drinks. No one pressed their call button. Even the air felt more alert. Outside the cabin, the plane drifted above layers of early morning cloud. The sky beyond the windows was no longer dark, but not yet day, caught between two worlds, the same way the cabin felt. Elijah wrote 3 full lines before pausing to look up. No one was looking at him anymore, not directly, but everyone had heard him, even without a single raised word. The echo wasn't sound. It was recognition, and while most passengers would forget what was served on this flight, they would remember the man in the hoodie and how everything changed after he said nothing at all. Because the real story hadn't begun at takeoff. It had begun the moment he refused to disappear. The wheels touched down at Kotoka International Airport just after sunrise. The sky over Accra was streaked with soft gold, the city below slowly stirring to life. The cabin lights brightened gently, seatbelt signs blinked on, and passengers adjusted their coats, stretching as if nothing had happened. But for those who had watched silently from their seats, the atmosphere felt different now, charged with something unsaid but understood. As the aircraft taxied slowly across the tarmac, the view out the left windows changed. 2 black SUVs stood parked just beyond the terminal's edge, their polished surfaces catching the early morning light. A small press circle, flanked by plainclothes security and 2 presidential protocol officers, waited in quiet formation. No red carpet, no marching band, just presence. Authority without noise. The captain reappeared near the front of the cabin. He didn't make an announcement. He simply stepped forward, stopped beside Elijah's seat, and offered a subtle nod. Elijah stood, zipped his backpack, and followed him without a word. No fanfare, no tension, just 2 men walking toward an exit. The other passengers watched in stillness, not out of curiosity now, but respect. From the galley, Claire watched too. Her eyes were wide, still struggling to process what had unfolded in front of her. Her cheeks, once dusted with powder and calm confidence, were now flushed with a deep, unmistakable red. She said nothing, didn't move, didn't breathe, it seemed, until Elijah was fully out of view. Outside, a Ghanaian news camera caught the exact moment Elijah stepped onto the tarmac. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. The footage would air just hours later, shared first on local channels, then across the continent. A man in a dark hoodie walking toward a waiting convoy. No speeches, no press conference, no crowd, just quiet power, reclaimed without a word. By midday, Air France issued a formal apology. It was polished, vetted, and filled with corporate regret. Words like unfortunate, isolated, and under review filled the statement. Social media didn't forgive so quickly. Within hours, Shankar Dignity, in the hoodie, and Hatcher Salute Elijah trended in multiple countries. Editorials called it a masterclass in restraint. Others called it a mirror. No one called it a misunderstanding. Claire was suspended from duty, pending an internal investigation. A memo was circulated to all crew about behavior, optics, and cultural sensitivity. It read more like damage control than accountability. The diplomat who had sat in 1A released a carefully worded statement about context and unintentional assumptions. No one bought it. Elijah never spoke to the press, not once. He didn't sit for interviews or post a statement. He simply returned to work, quietly, consistently, as if none of it had happened. But something had, and the country knew it. That weekend, a local news crew visited a rural school outside Cape Coast. It was a simple building, 4 classrooms, hand-painted walls, and the hum of chalk on blackboards. Elijah had funded its construction privately years ago. That day, without announcement, he arrived at the school, stepped into a class of 12-year-olds, and began teaching. He wore the same hoodie. A girl in the back raised her hand and asked who he was. He smiled gently, knelt beside her desk, and said, "Just someone who remembers what it felt like to be overlooked." At the end of the hour, he left them with one sentence, one that would quietly echo in social feeds and classrooms for months to come. Dignity is not worn, it's carried. He walked out as he had arrived, without fanfare, without guards, just a man. But those who had seen what happened aboard that flight knew the truth. He had never needed permission to lead, only space to stand. And now, no one would take that space from him again. Have you ever been looked at like you didn't belong? Judged before you spoke, questioned before you moved, measured by something as simple as what you wore? Have you ever felt the weight of silence, when a room decided you were less, without needing to say a word? Now, imagine being watched while your dignity is quietly stripped away, row by row, glance by glance, and choosing not to react with anger or pride, but with patience. Would you have stayed seated? Would you have stayed still? If this story reached a part of you that remembers what it feels like to be dismissed, to be misread, to be seen but not recognized, then don't share it for outrage. Share it for the reminder, because respect doesn't always come wrapped in uniforms or titles. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or demand attention. It lives in restraint, in the way a man remains composed while others unravel, in the way truth reveals itself without force. Dignity doesn't beg. It doesn't protest. It waits, quietly, until someone finally sees it for what it is. That salute wasn't a gift. It was a correction, a long overdue recognition of what had been there all along. And maybe next time the world is quick to judge the man in the hoodie, it will remember this. Power doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it just nods and walks away.